welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time to join the webinar today. Just to let you know, we will record this session and the overall webinar will be approximately 45 minutes with 30 minutes presentation and 15 minutes Q&A at the end. The Q&A is run via the special Q&A button at the top, which is next to the chat section. So feel free to post questions throughout. And then what we'll do is we'll aggregate the questions and aim to answer them all in the session at the end. So yeah, overall, I mean, it's hard to believe now we're really close to be approaching the final 12 months of the complete switch off of the PSTN network within the UK. So I think we're really heading to a time where maintainers and lift owners are facing really critical decisions about their lift communication systems and the lift assets, to really make sure that this communication system remains resilient and that passenger safety is not compromised with all the changes that are happening. To help cut through the noise and give you clear practical guidance, we're pleased to be joined by Phil Laws, who's one of the industry's leading experts with the PSTN withdrawal and all IP transition. So Phil has had some senior roles at BT Openreach and has been at the forefront of advising businesses, service providers and technology partners on the real world impacts of the switch off. And really key is what actions are needed to stay compliant and operational. So today's session will cover what's changing, when, why it matters, and really key is what you should be doing to prepare. So thank you again for being here. And with that, let's get started and I'll hand over to Phil. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. And just to correct one thing from John, it's something we had drummed into us. It's not BT Openreach, it's Openreach, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the BT group. So I've had it drummed into me to correct people, so I can't stop, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm Phil Laws. I've worked in BT all my career until I left a couple of years ago. I now work with Cambridge Management Consulting. I'm an associate partner there, and I specialise in consulting around the PSTN switch off and a few other things in terms of telecoms transformation. Whilst in Openreach, there's a couple of things I'll come on to later in this presentation around the rollout of FTTP. I was instrumental in setting up the initial programs there, and my last role in Openreach was actually around the PSTN switch off. So I set up the program in 2018, and I left, I think in 2023. So I've had a number of years in terms of the PSTN switch off. So just moving on the slides. So I've only got a single slide today that we intend to talk through. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so please do sort of capture your questions as we go through, either in the chat, the Q&A chat version, or at the end. So first of all then, I've called it PSTN switch off. It's got a number of names. WLR withdrawal, which is wholesale line rental. That's the actual product that is sold by Openreach. It's all the all IP program, landlines, PSTN switch over, copper shutdown. It's not copper shutdown, actually, I'll come on to that later. It's got a number of names. Essentially, it's the thing that runs the telephone network. This is also not an Openreach only thing. So Virgin Media O2 and Kingston Communications in Hull, they're also going through the same thing because this is an international theme. The theme is around the legacy networks that are time division multiplex networks, the digital networks that were evolved primarily in the 1980s, and the move to broadband, IP traffic, higher speeds and what have you. The current networks just can't cope with the need. The program was announced in 2018. With an end of 2025 timescale, which is now. It was extended about 12 months ago, primarily due to meeting the needs of vulnerable customers, actually. So 31st of January 2027 is the closing date for the PSTN. That doesn't mean to say, of course, we have to wait until that point. People need to be migrated now. And the latest news from Openreach as of yesterday, the program started with around about 18 million lines of WLR. It's now down to about 3. Of those 3 million, awful lot of vulnerable customers still, awful lot of critical national infrastructure, and also the tricky stuff. And that I would suggest that the lift lines that we're talking about today, that's the tricky stuff. So a lot of the things that haven't been migrated are those things that are more difficult to do. So in terms of what's been shut down, it's what you or I would know as landlines or PSTN lines, but also ISDN. That point seems to get forgotten. And whilst that's not a lift line thing, it is important. A lot of big companies use ISDN services. It's also old broadband, or ADSL, if you're familiar with that. It's the products that were launched about 15 years ago, I suppose, providing maybe 10 megabit downstream to your home. They're all going. I've written a strange word down here, parasitic services, and it was coined some time ago, and it's for those services that run on top of landlines, often through the use of DTMF signaling. And a part of the problem is that these things have been bought and sold by companies that installed, and they'll work. That company's now gone, and these things just run, and no one knows they're there. So in terms of why, the network itself is getting more and more fault prone. The two vendors to Openreach will not support the equipment beyond a certain lifetime, and Openreach itself doesn't have the people. The people who installed it and maintained it are now of an age, they want to retire, and essentially they haven't got the people to maintain the equipment. The people that have been maintaining the equipment are used to sort of standard problems that have occurred. So something happens, an exchange stops working, the team go in there and fix it because it's stuff they've done, for the past 20, 30 years. And a lot of the problems that they're now encountering are due to age. The equipment is aging. The faults that are coming in the technology are different, and it's due to age. It's also an inordinate cost to fix, and it's just not tenable. So the key thing is it's got to move on. One other thing I would say as well is that, and this is, I guess, down to us people on this call. This program is important because it impacts all of us. And when I say all of us, it's not strictly true, because you might not have a PSTN line at home. You might have ditched that some time ago, which is all well and good. But for me, I had to migrate. I'm on a fibre-based service now. It's your organisation, so the companies you work for, are they ready as well? So over and above the topic of today's conversation in the lift line space, it's all about ensuring that me, you, the companies we work with, our suppliers, our customers, they're all ready for the change. It's a big change. The one other thing I will say as well is that whilst we've got the new deadline of 31st of January that I have been assured won't move, it's worthwhile pointing out that in terms of the nature of these large transformational programs in a regulated environment. So Openreach sells to communication providers. Often they will sell to a third-party communication provider, and the value chain can be quite long. And one thing I sort of draw is the fact that whilst this program was formally announced in 2018 and will close January 2027, that is longer as a program than it took to from the announcement of the moon landing and the Channel Tunnel. It's a significant challenge. And whilst there's less engineering involved in this is more around the engagement through the channels to ensure that people are aware, the right people talk to the right people to get things done. And one of the things that I came across quite a lot when I was in Openreach, and I had this role of talking to the various organisations about the change, it wasn't something that was happening, this week, this month, this quarter. It wasn't important. It wasn't in front of their nose. And now we're getting there, as John points out. There's 13 months to go. And whilst we can talk about the work that needs to be done, and there's a good understanding in terms of those things that ought to be done, there's a good recognition in terms of the likely choices that can be made. We're then going to move into the issue of, well, hang on a minute, have we got enough people to do the work? And that's going to become critical. And one of the key points that I'll make through the presentation is need to act now. And whilst we on this call can act now, we've got to make sure that our customers, our clients, they engage and they act. So that's important. Make sure you get the right hooks in there. One of the things that is often said is about copper switch off. Copper, in fact, will be required for some years. So copper is used as part of a fibre product from the green cabinets you may see in the street to people's properties, primarily houses. So copper's not going yet. It'll be there for some time. There are some temporary products that are being developed within the BT group and Openreach with some catchy names, and they are to get people off the WLR product onto something that is akin to the local loop unbundling, so simple copper wire. So these products will be around for some time. But watch the final point on the top right there around exchange closure. Whilst the PSTN is being shut down, all the exchanges are going to they're staying there. As an additional program that is now kicked off, they're now going to go through and close telephone exchanges. So this moves beyond PSTN. It includes a lot of the copper, not all of it, a lot of it, but also Ethernet circuits as well. So high bandwidth services. And whilst that's less important in the lift line scenario, again, it comes back to that point in terms of it's important to your organizations, your clients. Okay, so that's another change that's coming along. And the plan is to close of the 5,600 exchanges that the BT group have. The plan is to close around about 4,500 of them by the mid-2030s. So it's about 1,000 exchanges. The first one happened last month, and we've got a couple more about to complete in the next quarter, and then there's a rolling program. So that's quite a big change coming along as well. Now, I mentioned about this value chain in terms of Openreach as the primary supplier going through a series of suppliers, vendors through to the ultimate customer. One of the issues that the likes of Openreach have, and some service providers, is they don't know what lines are used for. They have no idea. And rather interestingly, when I was discussing this with some of our customers when I was in Openreach, the likes of Sky, TalkTalk, Gamma, Zen, what have you, some of them came to me and asked me if I could tell them what their customers were losing the lines for. We have no idea. And this comes back to the point that a lot of services are being used not for their original purpose, which is to make telephone calls, people talking to each other. They've been used for other things. And often, as I mentioned earlier on, the people who provided these solutions, which are they're great, they meet the need. They've been supplied, and the organisation is gone. They've walked away. They've gone somewhere else. They've shut down. People have retired, and these things just tick over. So it's identification that's important, and that's not something that Openreach or some service providers can tell clients. And in terms of lift lines, in particular, the question is, well, who ordered the lift line originally? Who knows that a PSTN line that was ordered 15 years ago is connected to a lift? You can bet your bottom dollar it won't be the finance team who pay the bill to the service provider. The service provider won't necessarily know. As far as the data associated with the line is concerned, it might say provide a PSTN line to a comms room, and then it's routed from the comms room. It won't necessarily say lift, and that's the problem. So the ultimate client doesn't necessarily know, what the lines are used for. It's also possible, of course, that the client, the people actually using the facility, the building, don't own the building, of course, and it's a third party. It's the people who own the building. So, it could be the facilities manager, and this comes back to the long-standing recommendation of doing audits. Interestingly, when I went through this with my colleagues at the time in Ofcom, so Ofcom have a building down on the South Bank in London, and it's I think a 4-story building, and when I was in Openreach, I could go through and get the data for them, and that showed they've got I can't recall 20 or 30 lines, and I couldn't find someone in Ofcom to talk to about those lines. And when I spoke to the people in Ofcom, they didn't know who to talk to either, and it's a bit of a vicious circle. So we knew there were some lines provided there. It's a 4-story building. They have lifts, but the question is which of those lines were for the lift. So the audit isn't necessarily an Excel spreadsheet audit. It might involve getting your hands dirty and sort of getting in there and checking to find out what is there, what's used. Now, in terms of moving forward, the question is, well, what does one do? Because we've got a movement from the old networks into the new. It's an all IP world, and that is essentially by conversion to digital at the earliest point from the generation of whatever content we have. And if that's voice, that's straight into IP. I'm talking on a voice over IP line now because I've got a fibre product here, and that is true for anything that's provided over that circuit. Now the problem is in moving from today's world into the new world, the question is, well, can I simply connect my lift line device or other device? And I in my time at Openreach, I used to carry a whole stack of things. I've got a health pendant. You probably can't see very well. A health pendant I used to carry around, and a few other bits and bobs, a card machine, PDQ machine, and other things like that. And there was an assumption that you could just simply connect those devices into an ATA port, an analog telephony adapter port, in a router, and it'll work hunky-dory. And the problem is that isn't the case. So whilst in Openreach, we set up a test lab, and we invited communication providers to put their services in there, and I think we had services from six CPs. Excuse me. And that enabled vendors to come in and test against each one in turn. And I will say that in all the time I was there, and the people we had come in to test, not a single device worked consistently on all of them. Some worked on the majority, some worked on one. And there's some trivial things in there. And one example was one of the dial tones used by one vendor was out of the normal range for a dial tone detector in a device. So it was silly stuff. But the key point is that DTMF is not a secure transmission medium over an IP network or a mixed IP network where some parts are provided over an IP core, some parts are provided over TDM. So the transition period when everything is not quite IP yet, that's especially worse. And that comes down to latency, jitter. One bizarre thing, what we saw was that data being sent was being bounced back, responded to very quickly, and it was too quick for the device that sent the original message. So it thought there was an error, and it wasn't. It was working perfectly, but the problem is it was too perfect. So these things need to be tuned. And what I would say is that those people who've responded positively with the fact that their devices do work DTMF over an ATA port on a device, either the BT test lab, as BT have one, as well as Openreach, I would say they've been a bit optimistic. And the thing that I characterize the BT test lab as a bit of a Rolls Royce. BT tends to over-engineer, which is really good and very high quality. Other parties, other CPs, that doesn't tend to be the case, for cost efficiency purposes. And they include things like least cost routing. So, for example, I don't know, at a weekend, they don't route their traffic through the UK. They might route it through parts of Nigeria. It's odd things where they can save so much per megabit shifted. So the fact that a device works today, it might not work tomorrow. So what I would say is if you're ever told by a vendor that their device works on DTMF over an ATA port, I would say immediately distrust it. Ask them for the evidence of testing in all environments, and that it works, all the time. The other point, of course, with that is that if a device is proven to work, say for a BT telephone line, which is, as you said, Rolls-Royce engineered, that's really good. If the client suddenly decides to shift all their lines to, say, Gamma, will it work? Do you have to do more testing again? And the answer is yes. So I wouldn't trust anyone that tells you it works. The key thing I would say is that you need to move to a native IP. That's the way to go. Now, a slight caveat to that, that's assuming you're going to stay on a fixed network, and I'll come back to that later. Now, one of the things that we keep hearing a lot about is the rollout of Fibre, FTTP, Fibre to the premises. I was involved in the first rollout back in 2008. So again, I've got a lot of background on FTTP. And the one thing I do know is that Openreach and a lot of the other alternative service providers, when they roll out Fibre, they roll it out primarily to a residential consumer, area. So housing is well covered, often by multiple vendors, but businesses aren't well covered. So whilst you might cover all the hard to reach places in a village, for example, which is really good, Fibre might not be provided down the high street where a lot of businesses operate. And that has been true for broadband since it was developed, to be quite honest. The other point is that with FTTP is that there's no powering available from the exchange. It's glass, and therefore you need local power. So power needs to be provided locally, and of course, in the event of a power cut, what happens? The power goes out. So you need to invest in a battery backup unit, and all these things tell you that FTTP is a tricky answer to this problem. Now, when Openreach rolled out FTTP around Salisbury, which was the first fibre town, a whole fully fibre town or city, I asked this question at the start of their program. So I challenged them to say, are you really going to do 100%? And to be told yes. Now the answer is no, they didn't, because cost, the economics come in, and it's a consumer-driven program primarily, and places like MDUs, multiple dwelling units, blocks of flats, they have lifts in there. Often the whole of the MDU has been enabled for fibre. The lift have been missed off. So the key point is, do not rely on fibre. And even if fibre is available, bear in mind local powering is required and a battery backup unit. Okay, and that's both for the ONT device that is provided on the end of the FTTP line, and also for the router. It's quite complicated. So the key thing I would say is that the last point I've got down here, which comes down to pragmatism. There's no doubt to my mind that if for you or I at home, FTTP is great. It really is good. It doesn't go wrong. Broadly, it's fit and forget. You have to do your local powering. I get that, but real benefits. However, in the environment of lift lines and businesses, less so. Can't be relied upon. If FTTP is required, you've got to pay for someone to build it, because they won't build it on day one. Very costly. So that comes down to clients having lifts today. What is a good solution? And my personal take is that, and it's sad to say, given my background, fixed line solutions aren't necessarily the way to go. And my view is that a pragmatic solution that moves to a mobile, a wireless-based solution is a better option. Lower power consumption, ease of implementation, cost, reliability, that sort of thing. And without trying to blow AVIRE's trumpet, having a managed solution where the responsibility is passed to somebody else to sort out the mess. It works today. You sort me out. You provide whatever you think is right in terms of getting the solution up and running. With that mobile type solution, I think is the way to go with lifts. Sad to say, from my background, but unfortunately, it's a case of being pragmatic and getting it done. And coming back to the point I made earlier on, one of the things we have 13 months to go. This is something that can be kicked off really, next October. Resources aren't available. You've got to get in quick and make sure the message has got out there to the clients, to make sure they do take action, understand what they've got, and partner with somebody who can make these things happen quickly for them. That's my very quick rattle through. Happy to go join in with the Q&A, and I'll hand back to John.
I'm still on mute. Thank you very much, Phil. That was really informative. I'll check questions, but as of a couple of minutes ago, there wasn't any questions. So, has anyone got any questions? Feel free to put them into the Q&A above. We'll have a couple of minutes at that. One question I had, Phil, is around like validation on like ATAs and DTMF. If the solution's validated today, like, does that mean could things change downstream? So like, even if they got it working, they got all 14 tones working, will the networks change in some way, or could the networks change in some way?
Yeah, so they can. And the key point here is it's end-to-end connectivity. So it's from the client's lift through to a call center, wherever that might be, and
Yeah.
that can hop over multiple networks. So today, if that lift is provided on a BT line, you've got very good quality going into the core network. If it's then handed over to a third party's network, you might be going to an old TDM network. So you moved off IP, and then at the far end, let's say, for example, the call center is supplied by an ISDN 30 network supplied by BT. So you move from an IP new network to an old network back to an IP network. And the problem is where you have those the differentiation between the networks. That's where the problems lie. For those who have difficulty sleeping, the NICC Network Interoperability Consultative Committee have done a whole stack of work in terms of the movement to all IP. They've written some very good documents, and if you struggle to sleep, read some of those. ND 1431 particularly, which is a document name, that's ND 1431. That's a great document, and that talks about this exact issue in terms of why it's recommended not to use DTMF. And that's not just for lifts, to be clear, that's for anything. Health pendants especially, it isn't recommended. And in my little example there, John, where I said if the lift is connected by BT today, let's assume it's, that's all done and tested, and let's assume it works okay. If the client decides to move from BT as their access supplier, because BT have put up their prices, they move to Zen. Say, I'm not picking out Zen particularly, but Zen as an example, you've then got a different end-to-end network. So yes, it might work today, no guarantee it works tomorrow. And the thing is, if someone does change something, where in the process says I ought to test again, it's not built in anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting actually about the different communication providers routing the calls differently, and it's probably not something and interventions in terms of retesting all systems. I totally agree. I don't think many people would think to retest it. Yeah.
And what I have seen happen in the past is where someone has made a change, and I'm not talking lift lines here, where someone has made a change and some things don't work. Typically, what happens is the end customer, the client, they typically call up BT or Openreach. It doesn't work. Openreach has nothing to do with it. It comes back to that point that people might take a bit of offence to, this parasitic services. It's things running on top of products, and the lower suppliers, I haven't got a clue. I haven't got a clue about them. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And one question we've got is specifically around so the question is, I understand we're moving away from PSTN. What is the name of the new network that lift companies should suggest for their customers to move to? So how should that be framed?
That's a good question. Well, I guess you would have an answer to that, John, which is
there
isn't a standard new network that will replace the PSTN. There's a number of suppliers of fixed line services who've built their own networks, their own access networks, and the number of service providers who run on the top of them.
Yeah.
So there's no single answer. But the thing for me is that because it's quite a complicated landscape out there, my take is go to a trusted partner who can in effect sort out the mess and just do it all for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, from our standpoint, I guess what the way that we would frame it is that often, so we take Leah advice. So Leah's advice in general is to move away from fixed lines and move to a GSM based solution. And with a GSM based solution, that can be a hybrid where you've got older auto dialer kit on PSTN, or you go for a full change of infrastructure and move to digital auto dialer infrastructure with the GSM as well. There's hybrid solutions in place, and then there's full digitalization solutions in place, and then that gives an opportunity to move to have a cloud-based monitoring as well, and kind of the whole ties into the whole digitalization of assets. So yeah, that would be GSM as a technology, but then also thinking about how is this an opportunity to upgrade the infrastructure in the lift as well to newer technologies that will provide, for example, better interrogation, better updates, easier triaging, and more monitoring capability as it from a diagnostic standpoint. Yeah, another question from Bernd, which is, if I understand correctly, you advise operators to run their list via mobile communications. Now the 2G and 3G networks are being switched off in the UK. Is 4 or 5G coverage reliable enough in all regions?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm not a mobile expert, but what I do know clearly is though that mobile networks are upgrading. They are rolling out wider by removing 2G and 3G networks. They need to be replaced by something. And I think I'm right in saying the final 3G network closes down this calendar year, and that will free up more spectrum as well. So there's other ways and means to get coverage. There are other options as well around IoT. It doesn't have to be a telephone mobile network type solution. Just the point I'm trying to make is that relying on a fixed line solution, I don't think is the wise thing, and therefore hence the recommendation of the move to a mobile type solution.
Yeah, and in terms of the question on 4 or 5G, you can check coverage in areas. So Virgin Media O2, Vodafone have coverage checkers via postcode, and you can check 5G, 4G, 2G in particular geographies, so you can get a handle on that. Overall, 5G is not as good as in terms of building penetration. So the industry is not wholesale adopting a 5G solution. So it is around 4G. In particular, the 4G, and then the voice over LTE as the future voice carrier. So I think we have got a good 4G network, and maybe as 5G and internal building infrastructure improves, that might be an option. But I think this is not something that's probably a further than a decade away. And further to your point, Phil, as 3G gets retired, that'll free up more bandwidth, and the operators will buy that bandwidth and then do something else with it. So they might, they might sort of dress the signals and use that in a different way. One of the question is, which is a really good question, I think, is how, if you're a service provider, how should the PSTN switch off be explained to building owners to create urgency, but it not sounding like a forced upgrade? So I think this sort of lack of urgency is still definitely there in some quarters, and if the demand of this is not spread, then it will all get pushed to the end, and then capacity in the market will probably be challenged.
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and I think it's fair to say that you guys who work in the lift space are well versed in talking about why lifts need to be compliant and all the rest of it. The line I've taken with clients in this space is it's around the fact that in order to make sure their building can continue to operate, if it's a multi-floor building, they need lifts clearly. If something's going to happen such that the lifts can't be used because the lines don't function anymore, then they can't operate and advertise a fully featured building with multi-floors. I think it's the compliance and regulatory angle that needs to be pushed, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. Got another question from Glenn, which is like, if there's no signal for GSMs and it's in a challenging area, no 2G, no 4G, will auto dialers work on fixed lines? So that's a question there.
So yeah, I was going to say the previous question actually about coverage.
Yeah.
If in an area that there's no mobile solution, I'm not saying a fixed line solution wouldn't work or wouldn't be available. They need to be looked at very carefully to understand, what the need is, what solutions are available, and pick the right one and build it accordingly. So you made the point actually there, John, about postcode checkers. Postcode checkers for FTTP or for fibre, I think are worthless in this environment, because what that might say is that the postcode, yes, is covered, but that's all the consumer. It's residential premises. It's not the businesses. So needs to do some specific investigation there. But there are transitional products being made available by BT. They're primarily a copper line. So it's a copper line from the exchange. It's just a copper line with a basic voice service that can be provided. Now, one of the issues you've got there is the way services are provided. They have what's called a media gateway in the telephone exchange, and that provides PSTN-like services over that line. Now, two things. Given exchanges are closing, they won't be available in all locations. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the way they work is they have an ATA, an analog telephony adapter, in the media gateway. So the issues we spoke about having DTMF devices connected to an ATA port on your router sat in your lift, all you're doing is you're moving the ATA to the exchange. So the question is, will that device work on the ATA port in the exchange? And those services are provided by BT. So in terms of testing to the BT bits, it probably works fine. But again, with the end-to-end connectivity piece, with the different multiple services, will it work? And that's the question. And my take is that hasn't really been understood. And when people have done testing, they're giving it the big thumbs up without appreciating it's an end-to-end thing, and they don't test end-to-end variations, which is where the problems lie. So if it is a fixed line solution, my take is that you ought to have an IP native fixed line solution. So based upon broadband, where you're looking at an end-to-end connectivity. The question is, what broadband will there be available? And that is the question. And that's down to specific examples and looking at what's available.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Phil. One insight from the AVIRE side as well. I think we're in the tens of thousands of GSMs out in the UK, and as AVIRE has been like leading and selling that technology for probably a decade now. We are building up quite a lot of experience in terms of like challenging sites. So our technical team have been on site and trying to help customers, and sometimes the solution doesn't, we don't have, for example, an aerial solution that covers all eventualities, but we can support where needed on things like site surveys and or advise in terms of the equipment needed to do a good site survey. And just one example, we had a really challenging customer at one of the London airports where it was near to the runway. It had a lot of other signals kind of blocking the mobile phone coverage, and nobody could get it working, and it was a real headache for the customer. And in the end, the solution that we worked with the outside maintainer was having a roof mounted antenna that was focused in the direction of a base station. So it took work, it took time on site, it took some specialist antenna solutions, but we're able to get that working. But it's just a case of like, yeah, kind of thinking outside the box sometimes, and maybe kind of shopping around of what other solutions are out there to increase or give a focused antenna. I'm not saying it's going to cover everything, but yeah, sometimes there is tools and tricks to find a mast that's nearby, and it might involve like an external building provision, for example. Yeah, the question here from Jackson, which is, are there any resources or messaging content available to support in creating kind of content that educates to get customers more informed about the the PSTN switch? So it's more content. Yeah, go on.
So I guess there's a couple of things here. One is that Openreach VMO2 have some pretty detailed collateral that they've generated. Tech UK, as funded by DCIT, Tech UK have also developed collateral, both in terms of consumer and business, so there's a bit of both. But I know that's something that in the detail of the lift line space. So you mentioned, John, earlier on Lear. We worked with Lear over a number of years now. I know they've produced some one pages and what have you, and we've discussed about producing a bit more detailed collateral as well, and maybe that becomes something we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the resources on our website as well. We have a section there. Obviously, we have other specific information, and I think the DCIT have done some really good work recently. So we have copies of those. For example, letters to building owners in which they recommend they're taking action now, and it's signed by a government official, and it's designed to be shared by anyone in the lift community, so we can provide access to that. And I think it's in the government's interest to make sure that like occupants are safe in buildings and occupants are safe in lifts. So yeah, that's also available. One question from Tom is, will the adapters and add-on bits be battery backed? And it's more about like what happens if the building loses power.
So you need local power to make the thing work at all. So it's the Openreach optical network termination device. It's the white box of tricks. He said trying to find one that sits on the wall. That needs to be powered, and also the router. So both will need a local powering, and in the event of power cut, they will both stop working unless you have a battery backup device.
Yeah.
On the previous point, actually, John, I mentioned I'm trying to do my bit as well. So I've written quite a lot of LinkedIn articles, and it's trying to get the message out through that networking. So if anyone wants to sort of connect on LinkedIn to help spread the word, I'm more than happy to do that, because I know it can be like pulling teeth. Finding the clients and then trying to get the message over to them. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, thanks, Phil. One other question is, are there any possible options of a Starlink stroke satellite connection for this? We have seen, so just to answer that from the AVIRE side, we have seen some clients and customers use like satellite SIMs. So you'll typically see those with a +88 number. There are some nuances with using satellite SIMs, and there's some nuances in terms of like telephony, how that is routed, how that gets received. So it's not like, I think we have seen some small challenges. Overall, we've seen systems work, but we've also seen like call center link solutions where there's been a challenge in terms of how the call center receives that call. So I think it's not a kind of universal answer. I'm not sure about Starlink, but I would assume Starlink, we can take that offline. But I think Starlink works on like a satellite-based technology as well, a mobile technology. Yeah, have you got any data points on that one, Phil?
Well, just to say that these solutions they offer solutions where in difficult to reach places, remote places where the standard products typically aren't available. So that's their USP. And all I would say is that my personal take with satellite is that could be used as a sort of backup resiliency type option. I don't think I'd rely upon it as the main the single connection type.
Okay, thank you. My colleagues just popped on the Q&A as well, like the link to the DSIT, so the Department for, is it Science and Industry, I think? So the letter, yeah, that's it, in technology. So we put a link to that, and also we'll do a follow-up for the webinar as well. We'll follow up to all attendees, and we'll put a link to the recording, and we'll put some links to useful information. I think we've answered most of the questions, and in fact all the questions there. And then one of the questions from Mark was, will it be shared, the recording of this, so it could be shared with internal teams? Yeah, absolutely. We'll post this probably on our website, and then we may upload it to YouTube as well. So there will definitely be a link to the recording on our resources section on the website. So we'll give a copy to that. So yeah, on that note, I think we've reached time. So really appreciate everyone taking time, and yeah, thank you, Phil, for that really informative presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.